Something about Numbers 15 just makes me absolutely furious.
Furious, you say?
You tripping, bro. You tripping.
In this story, the Israelites find a man gathering sticks on the Sabbath day. Now, why he was gathering sticks, I don't know.
A person would be gathering sticks to build a fire. There are a couple of reasons to build a fire. 1, to keep yourself warm with, or 2, to cook a meal over. Biblical commentator Roy Gaines has noted that the man did not need to build a fire, whether for cooking or for warmth. He writes, "This happened sometime during the period when the Israelites were in the desert, where the climate was warm and the people had manna to eat. So a fire for warmth or cooking would not have been urgent if it were not on the Sabbath." It looks as if this man was going out of his way to violate the Sabbath command of the Decalogue. The verses right before this passage say, "But anyone who sins defiantly, whether native-born or foreigner, blasphemes the Lord and must be cut off from the people of Israel. Because they have despised the Lord's word and broken his commands, they must surely be cut off. Their guilt remains on them." So what this stick gatherer was basically doing was giving God a big fat middle finger.
Smite me, almighty smiter!
However, they decided to arrest him and hold him until they could hear from Moses about what the appropriate punishment would be.
They arrested the guy because they had a pretty good idea of what the law was. Exodus 31:15 says, "For 6 days work is to be done, but the seventh day is a Sabbath day of rest, holy to the Lord. Whoever does any work on the Sabbath day is to be put to death." And Exodus 32:5-3 says, "For 6 days work is to be done, but the seventh day shall be your holy day, a day of Sabbath rest to the Lord. Whoever does any work on it shall be put to death. Do not light a fire in any of your dwellings on the Sabbath day." But given what had just happened in the previous context, when they acted presumptuously and tried to go into Canaan after the people rebelled, the people of Moses understandably wanted to seek God first.
Moses supposedly communicated with God, who instructed him to kill the man. So he told his people to stone him to death. This punishment is draconian, vile, and savage. It defies all comprehension that someone would be put to death for gathering sticks. I find this story to be morally reprehensible, and anyone who reads this and thinks that the Bible is both true and good.
So, yeah, tell me how you really feel about it. In all seriousness, though, if all we did was read these 4 passages, yes, they would be seriously problematic. But let's back up a little bit. So, how did Yahweh feel about the Sabbath? Why did he want it to be so important to people? It would be difficult to imagine something more important than creating the cosmos, but even while God was doing exactly that, he rested, establishing a precedent for taking a Sabbath that goes back to the beginning of time. The command to keep the Sabbath day not only recalled God's creation rest, it also reminded Israel of their deliverance from Egypt, according to Deuteronomy 5:15. The Sabbath was also meant to be a sign of God's covenant with his people, according to Exodus 31:13. Furthermore, the Sabbath was designed to promote justice and limit oppression, since slaves could not be forced to work on the Sabbath. So sure, picking up sticks seems harmless, but by doing it on the Sabbath, the man was denigrating God's creation, his deliverance, and his covenant. Yahweh's punishment for breaking the Sabbath also signaled how important the Sabbath was. Yahweh not only commanded Sabbath rest, he also made it clear, both before the golden calf incident and after it, that the punishment for violating the Sabbath was death. The supposedly innocent stick gatherer would have known what he was committing. Everyone else did, and he was doing it in the middle of several rebellions. His decision to blatantly disobey the word of Yahweh was an act of distrust at best, and most likely a rebellion, and Yahweh decided not to be lenient at this point, lest a dangerous precedent be set for disobedience.
You expect me to believe that these people actually killed a man for gathering sticks, and that's a good thing? And I know there's Christians out there that are like, well, actually, that's the Old Testament. It doesn't apply anymore.
No, the commands to carry out capital punishment no longer apply to Christians. In the New Testament, Jesus took our capital punishment. But just think about the punishment that came on Ananias and Sapphira for just lying about how generous they were. This message wasn't lost on the early church. Acts 5:11 says, "Great fear came over the whole church and over all who heard these things." Especially in exemplary or first-time cases, God can seem to be particularly heavy-handed. God is not to be trifled with. He takes sin seriously. For the people of God, these punishments were to be sobering reminders of what God expected. Sometimes I think that we don't like the idea of harsh punishment because we don't hate sin the way that God does. But God is the same God in both the New and the Old Testament. The Apostle Paul writes, "For I do not want you to be ignorant of the fact, brothers and sisters, that our ancestors were under the cloud and they all passed through the sea. They were all baptized into Moses in the cloud and the sea. They all ate the same spiritual food and drank the same spiritual drink, for they all drank from the spiritual rock that accompanied them, and that rock was Christ. Nevertheless, God was not pleased with most of them. Their bodies were scattered in the wilderness. Now these things occurred as examples to keep us from setting our hearts on the evil things as they did." Christians might debate over the role of the Sabbath in the New Covenant, but they are all agreed that God still commands us to rest. Things like sports injuries, carpal tunnel syndrome, the common cold, cancers, accidents, job-related ulcers, stress-induced insomnia, strokes, and others are caused in part by ignoring the divine mandate to rest. In most cases, what is the first thing that a doctor tells a sick patient? He says, get some rest. God prescribed that thousands of years ago. Despite the fact that humans know the benefits of rest, we still need God to remind us, command us, and sometimes even punish us if we fail to rest. Personally, I'm thankful for the command to rest. In the ancient Babylonian creation myth, Enuma Elish, the god Marduk created humans from the body of Tiamat, his defeated rival, to serve the gods so the gods could rest. In the Pentateuch, Yahweh created humans in his own image, and then he commanded them to rest in order to bless them. Give me Yahweh over Marduk any day. All God's commands, even his severe ones, are meant to bless people.